Okay. I'm Charlotte Tenhoenstein, and you're watching Breakthrough News on BTR Today. Today, we're talking about the aftermath of the midterm elections, which obviously were extraordinary results for the Republicans, who now hold more state legislatures than they've had in almost a century. So that is pretty incredible. But specifically, what this might mean for foreign policy. And with me today is John Neffel from Radio Dispatch. So thank you, John, for joining me.
Absolutely happy to be here.
So this is obviously a pretty remarkable result. I think as of now, I think the final tally was the Republicans now control both chambers of 29 states compared to the Democrats who only have that situation for 11. It's just pretty mind-boggling. What do you think this vote in general was about? Do you think it was a referendum on the economy or on foreign policy or all of the above?
I think to a certain extent it was all of the above, and I think that what's so really fascinating about this latest round of results is that unlike in 2006, which I think was the last election that was this surprising and had this level of reversal, unlike in 2006 when there was a very clear national rejection of the Bush administration and the Bush um, war on terror. I think that now you have a much more fractured sort of electorate who is not only upset with Obama, which there clearly is a lot of anger towards Obama, some of it legitimate, some of it less so. But you also have people just mad at Washington in general, and because we have a two-party system and not some sort of parliamentary system, uh, there's only two levers to pull. And I think sometimes in the sort of Washington media bubble, people interpret support for the opposition party as also supporting its policies. I don't think that people were necessarily voting for conservative policies as much as they were sort of protesting en masse against the status quo. I mean, if you look at state initiatives, set abortion to the side for a minute because there were some very, very conservative abortion state initiatives that did pass. But if you look at marijuana laws, marijuana policy generally is drifting towards a much more progressive area. Look at minimum wage and sick leave. Those there were, I think, 4 states that passed new minimum wage laws. So you have simultaneously people in many different states going out voting for very progressive policies, and yet writ large the country has turned much more conservative. And I'm not sure what there is to account for that other than a complete rejection of the status quo and a sort of flailing at how to address it through electoral politics.
So what do you make of Obama's response? Because he seems to be obviously pretty conciliatory, but just so unfazed to an almost alarming degree. What did you make of that?
Well, Obama has always been far too conciliatory to the Republicans, I think, for most progressive taste. Obviously, the first 2 years, people think he could have done much more. He extended the Bush tax cuts for 2 additional years in 2010. He really made far too many overtures to Republicans early.
Okay, just on that point, given the results that just happened, could he even have been less conciliatory? I mean,
Certainly, I think that especially at the beginning of the presidency, when he was incredibly popular, and he could have, I think, been far more progressive had he wanted to on economic policies. Uh, but I think that what we're seeing right now is Obama sort of return to that inner conservative that is not ever all that far from the surface. I mean, if you look at what the White House is saying about uh, areas to come together, you have them talking about new authorization for military force to fight ISIS in Iraq and Syria. You have the White House also saying that that the results may help Obama's international economic agenda by pushing for neoliberal trade treaties, sort of like NAFTA, but on a global scale. And those are very, very popular amongst conservative lawmakers, less so amongst most Democrats. And so the areas where you have Obama moving to sort of quote unquote compromise with Republicans, I think that you'll likely see him more or less taking up those conservative positions and calling it a compromise. And I think that it will be mostly him ceding ground.
And what about immigration, where he's seems pretty staunch in his hopes to just bypass Congress if need be?
Yeah, I think that is definitely the outlier. And if he is able to, to enact some sort of reforms on immigration policy without Congress, I think that that will be one of the few areas in the next 2 years where he really does take a lot of executive action. And politically, that makes sense because we all know that the demographics of the United States are changing. We all know that in the next generation, the Hispanic vote is going to be incredibly important to get. And right now, the Republicans really don't have a very good chance of capturing much of that vote or of sort of stopping the turn away from the Republican Party that we've seen among many Hispanic voters. And I think that Obama and Democrats are going to do everything they can to make sure that they present themselves as the party of compassion when it comes to the immigrant experience.
Hmm. So you mentioned ISIS earlier. Let's talk a bit about that. And we're going to take a break in a second, but let's start talking about it now. So he's mentioned that he's going to seek congressional support for further military action in the Middle East, but that he already has executive powers, sort of implying that he doesn't necessarily need it to do some stuff that he might want to do. How important is support from Congress on this issue going forward?
Well, it seems like it's not all that important to the White House to have support from Congress. I think that what we'll see, when the next session, because I don't think that this will be done in the next 2 months. That's I would be very, very surprised if that happened in the this lame duck session. But I think that there is going to be a lot of appetite from conservative lawmakers in Congress to write a broad authorization for the use of military force, and it is a rare president who rejects being granted broad authority. So what we're seeing from Obama, and really what we've always seen from him, is that the policy comes first, whether that policy is launching drone strikes in Yemen or in Pakistan or Somalia in complete secrecy, or whether that policy is ousting Muammar Gaddafi during the Libya bombing campaign or going against ISIS. Obama doesn't think that he needs congressional authority to wage war. He thinks that the 2001 AUMF, that's the law passed shortly after 9/11, has granted him nearly limitless powers to wage war. And so now what we're seeing is, I think, the White House sort of talking out of both sides of their mouth, where they say, well, yes, we look forward to engaging with Congress, which is always how they put it, uh, and yet if Congress didn't pass a new AUMF, we wouldn't see the president all of a sudden say, oh, you know what, I don't have this authority. They'd find the authority somewhere.
Well, okay. That's got to be the most catch-all statement ever. Like, we look forward to engaging with.
Yeah. Yeah, it carries almost no information with it. It's like what you would say to a coworker that you had been trying to avoid for years. I look forward to seeing you in the hallways.
Right, exactly. Well, anyway, we are going to take a break. We'll be right back after this quick excerpt from the latest episode of Live Studio featuring Pine Grove. Ba 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 da 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 da. Cool. No, no, no.
Just give me one sec. Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
We are back with our discussion on the aftermath of the midterm elections. So, John, to what extent do you think that the ISIS issue will become a sticking point down the line and embroil the government further in squabbles, or do you think that it's likely to be perhaps a useful bridge to build consensus on?
Yeah, I think the latter. I think that there's going to be pretty broad consensus that that ISIS needs to be fought in some way. I think that what we're going to see from the major Republican leaders in the Senate, who are now going to be obviously in the majority and lead the various committees that deal with this kind of thing, whether it's John McCain, who's now the chair of the Senate Armed Services Committee, who has been trying to get the U.S. involved in Syria in some way for virtually even before the Civil War broke out, virtually. You have Bob Corker. You have other prominent Senate Republicans who are going to want to escalate the war against ISIS. And to whatever extent Obama sort of allows that mission creep to happen or wants it to happen, I think there's no question that there will be largely consensus that airstrikes will continue. There will probably be a slow drip of increased quote unquote military advisors on the ground, and probably more funding for Syrian rebel groups, which we've already seen by the CIA's own accounting that strategy almost never works. The only time the CIA says it has worked is when the CIA funded the Mujahideen in Afghanistan in the 80s against the Soviets, and that's a pretty hard that's a pretty hard win to put forward to the American people as a policy that we'd want to recreate. But I think that Republicans are going to call for more, as they always do. It's great for many of their largest donors from the defense industry. There's a defense industry person who was quoted in a morning email from Foreign Policy saying, "You're not going to hear anyone say that last night or that Tuesday was great for the defense industry, but it was." And so you'll see Republicans call for more action. You'll see Democrats in Congress largely be quiet on the issue because again, we've gone back to this world where Democrats won't want to be seen as quote unquote weak on terror. And I think that in the 2016 presidential election, unfortunately, ISIS is going to play a large role. And I think that the sort of restrained foreign policy and restrained military policy that ushered Obama in has largely gone to the wayside among Americans, and I think that's a real shame.
Well, what's interesting is so you referred several times to Syria specifically, which obviously is a hugely important, complicated situation in the Middle East, and yet that's one of the issues that Obama seems pretty undecided on. Like, bad that he doesn't even call it ISIS, you know?
Yeah, yeah. I'm not entirely sure why they still refer to it as ISIL. I thought that by now everyone would be on the same page about what to call it, but
Well, I mean, I assume that it's because he doesn't want that to have any implications for what he then has to do in Syria and taking a specific stance on Syria, because it just seems like there's still a lot of confusion over what needs to be done.
yeah, I think there is, and I think that within the National Security Council, there is a lot of confusion between the White House and the State Department. There has always been a discord on what to do in Syria. That's, of course, why we saw John Kerry come out and essentially say that there was going to be a bombing campaign against the Assad regime because they had used chemical weapons. And then a couple of days later, Obama came forward and said, "You know what? That's not going to happen." And I think that was a very embarrassing moment for Kerry and for the State Department, and that discord has largely remained for the last year. And it's not only between the White House and the State Department; it's also within the White House. And in a certain way, I'm sympathetic to those disagreements because Syria is, in many ways, the most complicated problem that you could possibly imagine. The competing interests there between Jordan, between Turkey, within Syria, when you bring in Saudi Arabia and Iran. I mean, the competing interests are almost unfathomably complicated, and unfortunately, there is no answer. There is no thing that the United States can do, I think, to make the situation in Syria better right now, and that's a very uh,
The option.
awful. It's an awful position to be in, but I think that it's largely true, and I think that largely whatever the U.S. does will escalate the situation, make it worse, and result in all kinds of unforeseen consequences.
Well, presumably, if it's a lose-lose in Syria, then you just have to decide how what you do in Syria affects the rest of the region, and maybe find some win situation affected by Syria elsewhere.
Maybe, yeah, but I mean, I think that with Syria, the only way to do the least amount of harm, both to Syrians and to the United States, is to or was to not get involved, and that ship has obviously sailed. There's no ratcheting back against that. There were reports this morning that the United States is bombing this shadowy, secretive group called the Khorasan Group, which is allegedly an offshoot of Al Qaeda. Some critics have said that it's essentially a media creation. I'm not sure which is true. But the bombing campaign is expanding, and it has really always been against al Nusra, Al Qaeda groups in Syria, not just against ISIS. And once that the proverbial genie is out of the bottle, it's virtually impossible to get him back in.
Well, on that really pessimistic note, we will wrap up.
That's my job.
Thanks very much, John. We'll be right back in a moment after this quick excerpt from a bonus edition of BTR Live Studio this week on breakthroughradio.com featuring Sunflower Bean. Thank you, John. Great.
Thanks. No problem. Good
Good
luck.
show. Whatever you're doing at 9.
Yeah, yeah. The just more radio dispatching. So hopefully you can leave work a half an hour early since you started a half an hour before.
Okay,
All
bye.
right, bye.